Rodrigo's hand gripped Isabella's wrist so tightly that bruises would bloom until morning. Purple, finger-shaped marks she would have to hide under long sleeves, even in the suffocating heat of the Bella Knot kitchen. And he dragged her through the narrow corridor that connected the restaurant's main dining room to the elegant bathrooms in the back. Bathrooms with imported Italian marble and gold-plated faucets and huge framed mirrors that reflected the luxury of the five-star establishment. And Isabella tried to resist, tried to plant her feet and pull her arm back, but Rodrigo was bigger, stronger, and had the managerial authority that all the employees had been conditioned to obey without question, because questioning Rodrigo Martinez meant losing a job that barely paid the bills, but was the only job available to a 22-year-old waitress without a university education and without family to turn to. "Rodrigo, please," Isabella whispered desperately, trying to keep her voice low. Because the dining room was full of important clients, businessmen in expensive suits, couples celebrating anniversaries, and groups celebrating closed deals, and causing a scene would mean instant dismissal, ruined reputation, and never getting a job at a decent restaurant again because Rodrigo had connections, knew all the managers within a 50-kilometer radius, and his word would always be believed over hers, without exception. "Rodrigo, I'm in the middle of my shift. I have tables waiting. I can't just disappear." But he ignored protests, ignored how she tried to stop him, ignored everything except his own growing anger that had started 30 minutes ago when Isabella had made the mistake of refusing his advances for the 5th time that month, had politely but firmly said that she wasn't interested in having dinner with him, that she appreciated the work, but a relationship with a superior would be inappropriate, and Rodrigo didn't take rejection well. He never had, and now he was about to teach a lesson about what happened to girls who thought they were too good for the manager who controlled their jobs. He pushed open the door to the women's restroom, an absurdly elegant space for utilitarian function, with 3 marble stalls and a lounge area with a dark blue velvet sofa and a low table with fresh flowers changed daily. And the lighting was soft, designed to be flattering, making skin look luminous and flaws disappear, but there was nothing that could make the situation about to happen luminous or beautiful, about the way Rodrigo locked the main door with a key that only management had, how he turned to Isabella with an expression that was part anger and part something worse, something predatory that made her stomach churn with fear, that finally replaced the hope that this was just another reprimand about performance, another empty threat about how she needed to be nicer to customers. "You think you can reject me?" Rodrigo said, his voice low and dangerous, not shouting because shouting would attract attention, but whispering in a way that was somehow more terrifying. "You think a waitress earning minimum wage can say no to me? Tell me I'm inappropriate? I make this place work. I hire and fire. I decide who thrives and who struggles. And you," he stepped forward, forcing Isabella to back away until she hit a marble sink with nowhere to go. "You decide you're too special to show proper gratitude when I offer attention." Isabella felt panic rising. She felt real terror for the first time because she had always managed to avoid Rodrigo when he got like this. There were always other employees nearby or clients needing attention or something that would interrupt before the situation escalated. But now they were alone in a locked space and no one would come because everyone would think she was just receiving a warning. Everyone would assume Rodrigo was exercising legitimate managerial authority and they wouldn't dare interrupt. They wouldn't dare risk their own jobs for a colleague who probably deserved a reprimand anyway. "It's not about being special," she said, trying to keep her voice calm even though she was trembling. "It's about maintaining a professional relationship. You're my boss. It would be complicated. It's not about you, not being—" She searched for words that wouldn't enrage him further. "It's not personal rejection. Liar." Rodrigo spat, and then his hand was on her throat, not squeezing hard enough to strangle, but enough to terrify, enough to show control, enough to make it absolutely clear that he could seriously hurt her if he wanted to, and there was nothing she could do to stop him. "Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I don't see how you smile at that customer at table 12, that Italian in the expensive suit who comes here every week and always orders your section? You flirt with him without hesitation. But with me, you act like it's a violation just to suggest coffee. Table 12. Italian customer." Isabella knew immediately who Rodrigo was talking about. She knew and felt a new kind of fear because he was talking about Luca Moretti, a man who dined alone at Bella not every Tuesday at 8 o'clock at night, always requesting a discreet table in the corner, always polite in ways that made him stand out among a clientele that often treated waiters like invisible servants, always generous with tips, but not ostentatiously. And Isabella wasn't flirting with him, she was just being professionally friendly. But she could see how Rodrigo would interpret her smiles as something more, because Rodrigo saw a threat in any male interaction she had. He saw competition where it didn't exist. "I don't flirt with anyone," Isabella said, her hands going to Rodrigo's wrist, trying to push his fingers away from her throat. But he tightened his grip in response, making it difficult to breathe, causing black dots to dance in her vision. "I'm polite to all the clients. It's my job." "It's literally what you pay me to do." Rodrigo laughed, his voice humorless. "Your job," he repeated mockingly. "Your job is what I say it is. And now I'm going to teach you exactly what I should have been doing all this time. I'm going to show you what happens to girls who don't understand their position." And then he was pulling her, forcibly turning her to face the mirror, pressing his body against her back in a way that made Isabella feel nauseous, and the hand that wasn't on her throat was going for her uniform, trying to pull at the fabric, and Isabella was fighting now, really fighting. Elbows going back, trying to hit his ribs, feet kicking back, trying to connect with his shins. And she finally opened her mouth to scream because discretion didn't matter anymore. Reputation didn't matter. Keeping her job didn't matter compared to what was about to happen if she didn't get help. But before any sound could escape, before any scream could tear through her throat, the bathroom door. The door Rodrigo had carefully locked, exploded open with such force that it ripped the expensive wooden latch completely off, and a man stood in the doorway. Not just any man, but Luca Moretti, customer at table 12, who apparently wasn't in the dining room but had been close enough to hear something, to notice something, to decide that the privacy of a women's restroom was less important than ensuring the safety of a waitress who had smiled at him every week for months without ever knowing who he really was beyond a polite customer with a taste for red wine and gnocchi. Luca took half a second to assess the scene, to see Rodrigo pressed against Isabella, who was clearly struggling, to see a hand on her throat and terror in her eyes reflected in the mirror, to see everything he needed to see to understand exactly what was happening. And the expression that crossed his face was one of such pure, absolute fury that even Rodrigo, stupid and arrogant as he was, recognized the danger and immediately let go of Isabella, taking a step back with his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. It was too late, much too late, because Luca was already moving. He closed the distance between the door and Rodrigo in 3 steps, quick and controlled movement of a man trained in violence. And the first punch connected with Rodrigo's jaw with such force that it made an audible cracking sound, sending the manager staggering back against the marble wall, blood already beginning to flow from his split lip. And Luca didn't stop. Didn't give Rodrigo a chance to recover or explain or plead. He just kept hitting with professional precision. Each blow calculated to cause maximum pain without killing, because death would be too much mercy for a man who touched a woman without consent, who used his position of power to terrorize an employee, who deserved to suffer in prolonged ways before any relief from unconsciousness was granted. Isabella had fallen against the sink when Rodrigo let go of her, and she watched with horror and relief intertwined as Lucas systematically destroyed the manager. While years of abuse that Rodrigo had inflicted on dozens of female employees throughout his career were avenged through the fists of a man who had no personal obligation to intervene, but had chosen to do so anyway. Blood was everywhere now, staining expensive marble, staining Luca's suit that probably cost more than Isabella's car, and she knew she should say something, should ask him to stop, before killing Rodrigo and turning ransom into homicide, but her throat was closed with residual fear and shock. And part of her didn't want him to stop. Part of her wanted Rodrigo dead for everything he had done, for all the times she and others had been inappropriately touched and threatened and forced to smile through. Abuse because the alternative was losing their jobs and starving to death. It was only when Rodrigo stopped fighting completely, when his body lay limp against the marble floor, that Luca finally stopped, breathing heavily not from exhaustion but from rage that still burned hot. And he turned to Isabella, and she saw a transformation as he shifted from violent to gentle in a space of seconds. As the man who had just beaten another unconscious was suddenly kneeling beside her with genuine concern softening his hard features. "Are you hurt?" Luca asked, his voice surprisingly soft considering what he had just done. "Did he hurt you before I arrived?" Isabella shook her head, realizing that tears were finally falling now that the immediate danger had passed. Now that the adrenaline was turning into a delayed reaction. "No," she managed to say. "You arrived in time. He was—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't verbalize what Rodrigo was about to do because giving it voice would make it too real, would make the trauma concrete instead of a preventable possibility. Luca nodded, understanding without needing elaboration. I know, he said. I know what he was about to do. And I swear on everything I am that it will never happen, that he will never touch you again, that he will pay for every second of fear he caused. He helped Isabella to her feet, gentle hands in stark contrast to the violence they had just inflicted, and she was trembling so violently she could hardly stand. Then Luca guided her to the velvet sofa, made her sit down, and then pulled out his phone and made a quick call, speaking in Italian that Isabella didn't fully understand but caught enough words to know he was summoning people, giving orders, putting a plan in motion that would deal with Rodrigo and the situation in ways she couldn't yet comprehend, but that obviously went far beyond simply calling the police. When she hung up, Luca sat down beside her on the sofa, keeping a respectful distance because she had obviously just experienced trauma related to a man invading her personal space, and he didn't want to add to her discomfort, even if his intentions were entirely benevolent. You need to know a few things, he began, choosing his words carefully. First, my name is Luca Moretti, and I'm not just a businessman as you probably assumed. I am, he paused as if deciding how much truth to share, I am what educated people would call a criminal. I control operations in significant territory. I am a man others rightly fear, and the violence you just witnessed is only a fraction of what I am capable of when properly motivated. Isabella should have been terrified. By the confession, she should have been running from a confessed criminal who had just beaten her manager nearly to death, but all she felt was overwhelming gratitude mixed with confusion about why a man like that would care about a random waitress being abused by her manager. Why he would risk exposure and legal trouble to intervene in a situation that technically wasn't his problem. Why, she asked, her voice small, why did you help me? You don't even know me beyond the fact that I serve your table once a week. Luca looked at her with a complicated expression, containing layers of emotion he normally kept hidden under the careful control a man in his position needed to maintain. Because, he finally said, because I've been coming here for 6 months. And every week you smile at me as if I were a normal human being instead of the monster the media portrays me as. Every week you ask about my day as if you truly cared. Every week you recommend dishes and laugh when I make bad jokes about my Italian being better than the cooking here, which ironically is a terrible interpretation of real Italian food. And in 6 months you've become part of the week I look forward to. You've become a rare moment of normalcy in a life that is predominantly violence and paranoia and loneliness. So when I heard noise coming from this bathroom, when instinct told me something was wrong, I didn't hesitate to check, because the idea of you being hurt was unacceptable in ways I can't fully explain, but that are genuine. Isabella processed the words, processed the confession that was as much about his gratitude for her kindness as it was about an attraction she honestly had never noticed because she was too focused on surviving shifts and avoiding Rodrigo to pay attention to how regular customers looked at her. And now? She asked. What happens now? Rodrigo will wake up and fire me. He'll destroy me professionally. He'll probably sue me for assault, even though you did everything. He will, Luca gently interrupted her. Rodrigo won't do anything, he said. Because Rodrigo won't work here anymore. He won't live here anymore. He'll barely live depending on how long it takes him to learn his lesson about touching women without permission. My men are coming now to take him away, to make sure he fully understands the mistake he made. And then he'll be deposited in a hospital in a different city with very clear memories of never coming back here, never contacting you again, never working in the restaurant industry, where he would have access to vulnerable victims. And you, Luca continued, you obviously can't continue working here after tonight. Not just because of Rodrigo, but because other employees will find out something happened. They'll ask questions you can't answer honestly without putting yourself at risk, so you need a clean exit. I have my own restaurant, a much better establishment than this one. Authentic Italian food, not the Americanized version they serve here. And I need a service manager. The salary is 3 times what you earn here. Full benefits. And my personal guarantee that no one will touch you inappropriately because employees who work in my establishments are absolutely protected. Are you interested? Isabella should have had 1,000 questions. Should have been hesitant about working for a criminal. Should have been worried about moral and legal implications. But honestly, all she felt was relief that Rodrigo was being dealt with, that she would never have to see him again, that she was being offered a way out of an impossible situation by a man who had proven through his actions that, at least in this instance, he was a hero, not the villain his reputation suggested. "Yes," she said. "I'm interested. Thank you. For everything. For saving me. For not judging me." For she fought back tears again for caring when she had no reason to. "I always have a reason to protect the innocent," Luca said. "It's one of the few rules I never break. No matter what other lines I cross." "And Isabella," he hesitated, as if the next words were difficult. "I know the timing is terrible. I know you've just been through trauma, and the last thing you need is another man declaring interest, but I need to be honest because honesty is another rule I value. This intervention tonight wasn't just about doing the right thing. It was personal. It was about you, specifically. I have feelings that go beyond appreciating a nice waitress, and if at some point, when you've had time to process everything, when you're no longer traumatized, when life has stabilized, if there's a possibility you'd consider having dinner with me, not as a customer, but as," he searched for the word, "as a suitor, I would be honored." Isabella looked at Luca, truly looking for the first time at not just a polite client, but a complex man who was both dangerous and kind, who had brutally beaten Rodrigo, but held her gently, who lived in a world of crime but possessed a code of honor that many supposedly law-abiding men lacked, and she didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she could develop romantic feelings for a criminal, but she knew for sure that he had saved her that night, that she owed him gratitude that went beyond words, and that she was at least willing to consider the possibility when her mind stopped spinning with adrenaline and residual fear. "Ask me again in a month," she finally said. "When this," she gestured vaguely to the still unconscious. "Rodrigo, when this is memory instead of the immediate present. When you can think clearly about the future instead of just surviving now. And if you're still interested, if this wasn't just a knight in shining armor impulse, then we can discuss possibility." "Fair enough," Luca agreed, and then the door opened again, and 3 men in dark suits entered, clearly Luca's associates, clearly there to carry out orders regarding Rodrigo. And Luca stood up, gave quick instructions in Italian, and they efficiently took Rodrigo's body and disappeared through a back exit that Isabella didn't even know existed, carrying the unconscious manager away as if he were trash being removed, as if he were a problem solved instead of a person. And perhaps in Luca's world that was exactly it. Perhaps he dealt with threats like that routinely, eliminating problems before they could become bigger. Luca guided Isabella out of the bathroom, through the hallway back to the staff area where she retrieved personal belongings from a tiny locker, and then out through the same back exit his men had used, to where the car waited, a black sedan with tinted windows that screamed importance and danger. And the driver opened the door without a word, allowing Luca to help Isabella in before joining her in the spacious back seat that smelled of expensive leather and consolidated power. "I'll take her home," Luca said. "And tomorrow, someone will come with a work contract for a new job, with a salary advance, sufficient to cover any immediate financial needs, and with contact information for a trauma therapist who's on my payroll and sees people in situations where silence is required, where professional secrecy is absolute because her clientele is often people in my world who can't risk standard medical records." Isabella nodded, accepting help because the alternative was trying to process everything alone, and she knew she didn't have the emotional or financial resources to do that properly. She knew pride was a luxury she couldn't afford when a man was offering practical solutions to real problems. When the car stopped in front of her modest apartment in a neighborhood that was safe during the day but questionable after dark, Luca walked her to the door, waited while she searched for keys with hands that still trembled slightly, and before leaving he said one last thing. "Rodrigo Martinez will learn that touching you was the biggest mistake of his life," he promised, his voice cold, with conviction. "Not only through the physical pain he has already experienced, but through the complete destruction of his future. When my men are finished, when he has had adequate time to reflect on his actions, he will be dumped in a small town far from here without money, without connections, without the possibility of return, and will live out the rest of his days knowing that arrogance and abuse cost him everything. This is justice that the legal system rarely provides, but that I always guarantee for those under my protection." And Isabella believed. She believed because she had seen the violence Luca was capable of when motivated. She had seen the efficiency with which his operation worked, and she knew that Rodrigo really didn't stand a chance against a man with Luca Moretti's resources and determination. She went into the apartment, locked the door, and finally allowed herself to completely break down. Cried for the trauma avoided, for the liberation from months of terror. Under Rodrigo, for the confusion about her feelings towards her criminal savior, for everything that had changed in the space of an hour that seemed to last an eternity. The following month brought complete transformation. Isabella started a new job at Luca's restaurant, which was truly exceptional, with authentic decor, a traditional menu, and a clientele that was a mix of legitimate elite and underworld figures. Everyone treated employees with absolute respect because no one dared to disrespect them in Luca's establishment. The work was challenging but rewarding in ways Bella never had been. And the salary allowed her to move to a better apartment, help her younger sister with university tuition, and live without the constant anxiety about money that had been her companion for years. And therapy helped process the trauma, helped Isabella understand that the abuse wasn't her fault, that Rodrigo was a predator who had attacked dozens of women over the years, and that the system had failed to protect her because his power in the industry created silent victims. The therapist never asked how Isabella escaped, never asked what happened to Rodrigo, only focused on healing, recovery, building the trust that the abuse had destroyed. And Luca maintained a respectful distance, seeing Isabella at work, but always professionally, always maintaining the boundary he had promised to uphold until she was ready for more. This patience, this respect for her schedule, made Isabella begin to see him differently, to appreciate not just the rescue, but the man behind the reputation. A man who was loyal and protective and capable of profound kindness when he chose to show it. It was exactly 30 days after the deadline she had set that Isabella sought out Luca in his office at the restaurant. She entered without knocking because he had said the door was always open for her, and found him reviewing financial paperwork, looking tired in a way he rarely showed publicly. He looked up. When she entered, surprise crossing his face, followed by something that could be hope. "A month has passed," Isabella said. "And you said to ask again about dinner. So I'm asking, is the invitation still valid? Because I've spent 30 days thinking, processing, trying to decide if I can separate the man who saved me from the world he operates in, and the conclusion I've reached is that I don't want to separate. I want to accept him completely. I want to really know you. I want to see if the feelings I've begun to develop are real or just disguised gratitude." Luca stood up, circled the table, stopped nearby but not too close, because he was still mindful of her space, still aware of the recent trauma. "The invitation absolutely stands," he said. "And Isabella, the feelings I have for you haven't changed. They've only grown, watching you recover, watching the strength you've shown rebuilding your life, watching the courage you have to give a man like me a chance. So yes, dinner. Whenever you want, wherever you want, no pressure, just an opportunity to talk honestly about the possibility of a future together." And they had dinner. And it was the beginning of a relationship that was unlikely and complicated but genuine. Luca proving through his actions that the protection he offered that night was not an aberration but standard practice. That he defended those he loved with absolute ferocity. That his code included never allowing innocents to be hurt in his territory. And Isabella learned that loving a criminal meant accepting complexities, meant understanding that a man capable of great violence was also capable of great tenderness. That the world was not black and white but countless shades of gray. And that sometimes a hero wore a blood-stained suit and had a past that would frighten most but a gift that was completely dedicated to her. As for Rodrigo, he never returned, never tried to make contact, completely disappeared from the city and industry and rumors. That eventually surfaced suggested he was living a diminished life in a distant place, working minimum wage jobs and constantly looking over his shoulder because the lesson Luca had taught was permanent and terrifying. A warning that echoed through the underworld that touching a woman under Luca Moretti's protection was a sentence of complete destruction, and this reputation protected not only Isabella, but countless other women who worked in his establishments, who knew that if anyone touched them inappropriately, if anyone abused their position of power, retribution would be swift, absolute, and merciless. And years later, when Luca proposed to Isabella, when she said yes and they planned a life together that would be challenging but full of true love, she thought about that night in the marble bathroom, about how the worst moment of her life had become the catalyst for the best thing that ever happened, about how Luca's revenge wasn't just about punishing Rodrigo, but about demonstrating that she mattered, that her life had value, that no one would touch her without devastating consequences, and that promise of fierce protection became the foundation of their relationship, became proof that sometimes a savior comes from the darkest places, That sometimes justice is served not by the legal system but by a man operating outside the law. That sometimes the truest love grows from the most terrifying moment when someone appears exactly when needed and vows revenge that changes everything, that saves lives, that offers a future that seemed impossible just hours before. And that gratitude for salvation can transform into genuine love when the Savior repeatedly proves that the first intervention was not an anomaly, but revealed character. That protection was not a momentary impulse, but a lifelong commitment. That a man dangerous to enemies was absolute security for those he loved, and Isabella loved him completely, silently thanking Luca every day for listening to the problem, for choosing to investigate, for breaking down the door and saving her, and for swearing revenge that changed her life's trajectory from desperate struggle to happiness built on the solid foundation of a man who always kept his promises, especially promises to protect those precious to him, especially the promise made that night in the marble bathroom that revenge would be served, safety would be guaranteed, and love would be offered if she wanted to accept, and she did accept, and never regretted it.